You are listening to the Good Girl Podcast. My name is Cameo King. I'm the host of the Good Girl Podcast, a podcast where we are redefining what it means to be good. We do this through uncomfortable truths. I call those truths confessions. So every week we have someone on with a confession. The goal is freedom. The goal is healing. The goal is for you to walk in your truth, because that is the only way you can get free. I'm excited about this week's podcast. I think it's a great way to tie up the season. Yes, we are going to take a break. We pushed through I think we've been going consistently for a year. We kept going during the pandemic. We typically take a break in the summer. And so we're going to try that again. We're still going to obviously produce content. We're still going to have videos, me engaging on social media. We may do like one or two like live events, and I may also just pop in there randomly. So that don't mean you completely disengage from the Good Girl Podcast. But excited for today's conversation. And if you haven't already, because every season we like to take it up a notch. Who knows? You know what, guys? We may have Oprah on. I'm on my manifesting tip, right? So we may have Oprah, we may have Beyonce, we may have Meg Thee Stallion. You just never know. Okay. Tell me what your interests are. Who you be with? And also don't forget, we're always as well accepting confessions, right? You can just click that. You can go to our website. You can click our link in our bio on Instagram. And there is a way where you can submit your confession and even submit a topic that you want us to talk about. And we may contact you. Remember what a confession is, because I get this a lot. Let's be real clear. A confession is something that you are admitting, something that maybe you aren't too proud of, maybe a faux pas conversation that you want to talk about. Not something you're trying to preach to folks, right? We don't want that. Not necessarily your mantra either, but it is a sincere confession, something that you have grown from, something that can free others, and something that you had to even be freed from yourself. So make sure you do that and make sure you stay connected with us. But let's hop into today's conversation. And I'm so excited because you know why? Because I got my homie.
Hey. What up, though?
What up, though? I got my homegirl, Danielle Moore. She is a familiar face in the Good Girl Podcast land. She is my business bestie. She just so happens to be, out of all of this, she just so happens to be a licensed mental health therapist. She is the head practitioner at the Refresh Wellness Center, and that is a telehealth therapy business. You can call in and you can get therapy. And she's been doing this since before the pandemic, because you foresaw this. You foresaw these things.
Absolutely. I wanted to make sure that my services were available to people who weren't just in my physical location in Dallas, Texas. And so Refresh Wellness Center was born in the virtual space in 2018 and has been 100% virtual since February 18th of 2018.
Yeah. So we're pro therapy here. So excited about today's show. Today's topic really came out of me running my mouth. And Danny putting on her therapist hat and talking about the consistent conflicts that I saw in my life, and about why I continued to see these conflicts. And so always interested in learning, always interested in growing, and always interested in being a better person. And so if you don't know, we're going to talk about today the number one issue that causes the majority of problems in all relationships. And I know that can seem like a catch-all. Like, how can one issue really cause all the problems in relationships? But it is. And we're going to talk about it today. All right. But before we do that, let's do this little fun game. It's not a game, but it's just like kind of like a shoot from your hip. Like, what song is on your mind? Bring us into the present moment, because that's all we have is the present moment is right now. So Danny, I'm gonna toss it over to you, and I'll probably go too, because I have a song right here, right? I have a song right here, and so I'm gonna count down to 3. Count down to 1, not to 3. I'm gonna count down, and then you have to go, okay? Whatever song is on your heart, that brings us into the present moment, right? 3, 2, 1.
Well, now.
You were supposed to go! Oh!
Killing me softly. I can't sing, y'all. I can't sing, but I'm telling you, like, my like, when something hits or when something resonates with me, I say one or two things, baby, or boy. That brings us into this current space. We all need to be able to just have that Beyonce register just for that one run. Just for that run, so that we can express ourselves appropriately. Yeah. But you know what? We do it anyway, off key.
We do. Because it hits. It hits. On the appropriate time. Every time. Especially when when we're talking about a guy and he's being inappropriate, or when he's being extremely appropriate, and you just be like, boy.
It doesn't matter. Either you could be doing the right thing or the wrong thing. It's fitting.
It is.
Because it's exaggerated.
Right.
That's the purpose of the line.
So fellas, if you ever hear your girl say that, I don't know, it could be this one or it could be down. I don't know what you're doing, wrong or right. But so for me, you gonna count me down?
Yes. I think I got and 3, 2, 1.
Tell me what your interests are. Who you be with? What number to dial? Can I call you for a while?
Listen, so one of my favorite things about my friend Cameo is hearing her make up her own lyrics to songs. This was one of them.
Those are the right lyrics. Weren't they?
No.
Wait, is
the right lyrics are tell me what your interests are, who you be with, things that make you smile, what numbers to dial.
I was like,
you're gonna be here for a while. I'm gonna call my crew, you go call your crew, we gonna rendezvous at the around 2. Press the lead, throw the keys to little C's, okay, sorry. But honestly, she was certain that those were the right
I was certain.
Because it's the Cameo version of the song, y'all, and I love every single bit of it. It's like one of my favorite things about her.
I was certain. I'll sing it again. I could have sworn those were the lyrics. Anyway, we're here. So let's hop into this topic. The number one issue that causes the majority of problems in all of our relationships, and I'm going to actually toss this over to Danny because I think you'll be able to present the clinical perspective, and then we can somewhat unpack it from there. So go ahead.
The number one issue that causes conflict in most relationships is when one or both parties is unwilling to do their work. And what I mean by that is, either someone has evolved or is in a place where they're asserting that something's not working for them, and the other party is either unwilling to hear them, unwilling to grow with them, projecting their own thing. It comes, or it can be a clash of both, right? Mm-hmm. And so, from a clinical perspective, it's like, okay, well, what do I do in this situation? Again, a lot of our conflict is coming from one or both parties not willing to do what needs to be done in order to resolve conflict in the space. And so being able to kind of talk through without being triggered, going back and forth because you feel embarrassed or called on the carpet, and then you become defensive, and then you deflect, and then it just becomes the situation where it becomes more and more conflict until someone has to make a decision to disengage.
Yeah. And I think it's so important also that we make this as practical as possible. So what does this look like when I have an issue with anybody, right? So this isn't just specific to romantic relationships. This is romantic, familial, even on the job. that when someone essentially does not accept responsibility for their, because I think that's what it comes down to, like you're not accepting responsibility for your actions or what led us to this point of tension or conflict. It's just, I'm pointing the finger at you. This is what you need to do. When in fact, I think those things can be true that, yep, I need to be a better listener or I need not to jump to conclusions. But I think for there to be growth on both parties, you know, two people, like it takes two to tango. You are not always right. You are not absolved when there is conflict. Like there's always something you can learn. I remember, and I feel like I learned this concept actually working. I used to work for ETA, Eric Thomas and Associates. And one thing that we learned in like, I'll call it like employee training, is that after like maybe we've had an event or after something didn't go so well, right? One of Eric's philosophies was, I don't care how good or how bad or what happened. There is some place where we can take responsibility as a company, as an employee, for what went wrong. So I need you to look. I need you to search for ways you can improve upon how we approach this situation. So what that did, I carried that mindset over into everything I did because it did make a difference, and it did allow me to grow and to improve even in my personal relationships. And when I tell you this concept carries over, so when I was managing for a nonprofit, there was an employee, and he consistently showed up late. And even though I would tell him, I need you to be on time, this is what time, I need you to be there, consistently showed up late. But what it did for me is I would tell him essentially an hour before the actual time started. And so that allowed me to take responsibility for whatever I could do in that situation. That doesn't mean I was necessarily wrong or right, but at what point in time are you going to be responsible for managing these people because you know his habits? That doesn't make his habits right. But if you still have a goal in mind and you're still trying to get the job done and you know he comes in late, tell him an hour before he's really supposed to be there. And so that's kind of how I look at that.
Absolutely. The other piece is that instead of accepting responsibility, people use that as an opportunity to blame, shame, and attack about something else. The party who's attempting to hold them accountable. And so it's basically like saying, how can you hold me accountable if you do X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, and I was offended by that, and that's why I did that, and it's like you may be using some previous offense to endorse your bad behavior and to say that absolves you of responsibility in this instance. And so when you run into that, it is, best to acknowledge what that person is saying and return right back to your point. And so sometimes that can be hard to do, especially if they say something that triggers you. And that's the point. It's to trigger you, to get you off, to get the focus off of them. Right. And so, how many of you have experienced telling someone that they did something that hurt you, or making an attempt to hold someone accountable about their behavior, and they what I would call manifesting? They manifest and they start cussing and screaming, and they become agitated and aggressive and loud. Their tone becomes elevated, and all of this stuff is to manipulate you into cowering down and reverting and not holding them accountable for whatever behavior. And so when you're able to call that stuff out and not be triggered by it, then that way you can move forward and see how you want to continue to respond with this person moving forward.
I've always asked, why is it so difficult for someone to accept responsibility for their actions, or to be accountable for their actions, or however it contributed to this space we're in? Because it's typically tension that brings us here. It's typically some type of tension that brings us to this place. And for me, I think it has everything to do with, it reveals places that need to be healed in the other person. it is a trigger for the other person that I'm calling you out on this behavior, and you don't want to accept that that is who you are. You don't want to accept that that is what you did, that you hurt me, or that is just trash, trifling behavior that needs to be corrected or that needs to be addressed. And that they, in a sense, like, because it's connected potentially to a core part of who they are. And it's going to take them down this path of truth, of reality, that you aren't who you think you are. And I think that's probably one of the most, I think that's a part of the conflict of not accepting responsibility or not being accountable for your actions. And I'll explain it like this very briefly. Like, it's different if I step on your shoe and I hurt your toe, you're like, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, because that's like an acceptable mistake. But if I tell you that you are selfish, or your behavior is selfish, nobody wants to be identified as selfish. You really think that you're a giving person, and that's maybe something that you even hang your hat on. It becomes more difficult. And typically that behavior is probably connected to, I feel like everything is connected to trauma, but it's connected to some type of trauma. And that's why you don't want to address it.
Absolutely. It's all connected to trauma and being hypervigilant about not experiencing experiencing what you experienced at the trauma experience. Mm-hmm. Like, you have people who engage in certain behaviors because they are dealing with the unhealed parts of the trauma. So you may have someone who is overly generous and, will try to do things because they are selfish, right? Or because they want to be the person in the position that's giving, and that's something that they want to leverage, and they want to use that to manipulate you. How many of you have ever experienced having someone do something for you, and then they constantly remind you that they did that for you, and it's something that they leverage over you, and it's also something that they use to mistreat or mishandle you? Yeah. None of that has anything to do with you. That all has to do with themselves, their own insecurities. You have people who, are trying to hotwire genuine connections by doing, by oversharing, overspending, overextending, doing all of these things because they fear rejection, because they have some bedrock trauma that made them feel rejected, some bedrock trauma that made them feel unloved. Yeah. And so you're doing all of these things in your relationships to try to avoid those feelings. And so when somebody holds you accountable and calls you on a carpet about your behavior, like, hey, like, this is affecting me in this way, all they're thinking about is what their intentions were. And they don't care about what the impact was because they set out to do something different.
And it makes me wonder too, if individuals know that that's what's happening. My theory is some do and some don't, right? Some are highly aware that I am intentionally avoiding accepting responsibility for my behavior in this conversation, that I want to bring up something else about you, something else about your wrong. Like, we're talking about your selfish behavior, but you want to bring up the fact that, well, I didn't wash the dishes 2 weeks ago, which is true. But what that does is that flips the script, that changes the conversation. And I love how you said, I kind of want to bring that back around. Like, we can acknowledge that, like, you're right, I didn't wash the dishes those 2 weeks ago, but we can talk about that later. Right now, we're talking about this because this is the issue I brought up. I've had to redirect. Like, we can definitely talk about that, but you can bring that up at a separate time, or even after we finish this conversation, because right now it's about this specific, but it's so hard to redirect when you have people.
So hard.
When you have, like, when it's such a tough pushback when you're trying to focus. And so I led with, do they really know that's what they're doing? I think some do. And I think some have the slightest idea, because I think they aren't necessarily avoiding, like, consciously, they aren't avoiding responsibility. They're avoiding the pain that comes with that.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily like this phrase, but I'm going to say it. humans are creatures of habit. And so the saying monkey see, monkey do. You know, we really do what was modeled to us. And for a lot of us, our parents and our caregivers did not have good emotion regulation skills and did not have good communication skills with us. They may have exhibited those things with other people, but in order to make you behave or do whatever it is that they wanted you to do, they would raise their voice, they would condescend, they would, you know, do all of these things. And then they would never take accountability for how they mishandled or mistreated you. It absolved them because they're the adult, they're the parent, they're the caregiver in the situation. And so you just got to take whatever they did and get over it, because they're what I look like apologizing to a kid is the posture in most Black people's family. Well, we grow up and we take that same behavior into our adult and into our interpersonal relationships. And of course, I have to say this, that's the legacy of slavery. So, you know, that was handed down from generations to generations of not being able to back talk or not being able to hold massa accountable for mishandling and mistreating you. And so that was passed down, you know, that's the legacy of slavery. And it's still very much present in our relationships today. And so it's very hard for people to accept responsibility for how they have hurt you. But it's also hard for the person who's trying to hold the person accountable, like to not be triggered, to no matter what that person says, stay on task. But, you know, a part of that, most of it is maturity, but letting that other person know, I'm going to give you an opportunity to voice whatever concerns, hurts, or whatever it is that you have with me. But I initiated this conversation to address this. We can address the things that you're talking about, and I want to respect you enough to give you an opportunity to talk about those things, irrespective of what it is that I'm talking about right now. This isn't a tit for tat, a go back and forth.
Yeah.
But you are now communicating to me that you too have an issue. And I want to give you the floor and the space to be able to address that, but not in a way to where you want to override what it is that I'm talking about right now. You want to just bulldoze over what I'm saying just to get your point across. I respect you enough to allow you to be able to speak your truth. But I initiated this I initiated this conversation for me to be able to speak my truth. So let's just process through this and we can talk about how the two are connected. Does that sound fair? Child, please listen. That's easier said than done. Not everybody has this skill set. Like I have this language and I still have to come back to myself, you know. Now, the way that I have set up my current relationships, I'm just not in relationship with toxic people. I can't deal. Like I can't. And so sometimes when people have decided that they are committed to being in conflict with you, you have to disengage. And that's the part that's hard. Your growth, your healing, your evolution may cause you to have to disengage completely or disengage, you know, somewhat from people who are committed to drama, conflict, you know, et cetera.
And that I'm glad you said that. I want to highlight that, but that how difficult that is in the moment to find the words when, in a sense, tensions are high, or maybe when the person has said something to trigger you, or maybe when you know good and well, like you're right, or you know good and well, and I don't want to say right, but there's an explanation behind whatever happened, or if we just come to this understanding, it's hard to bring yourself back and to have those words to articulate to the person and say, hey, we can put this like we can definitely talk about that versus they had nothing to do with me. I did this, you know. You know, it's difficult, and it definitely takes at least one healthy person to wrangle the whole conversation in, and that can be taxing. Like, you want to check out after I just had to do all this explaining and all this finagling just to get us to a point of discussion. That is, look, I've done it on more occasions than I would like. And after we come to a conclusion, even after, there's an understanding, there's healing, someone accepts responsibility, I'm done. I don't want to. My heart has just gone through a series of emotional Olympics with this person, because it took me so much to get you to accept. Like, I had to create a mathematical equation. I had to, put you in a corner. I had to shut all this stuff down. I had to show you 5 examples of how that doesn't make sense, and then give you a literal playback of the voice notes you just left me to prove to you that don't nobody want to do all that.
But you're having to do that because the person does not want to accept responsibility. And so they're deflecting because they are embarrassed. It's not because they don't understand. It is because they are committed to not accepting responsibility for their actions. They think that their actions are justified based on something, based on whatever it is that they feel like they're justified upon. It's really hard being that person when you're the person who was wronged in the situation, and that person continues to blame, shame, attack, deflect, and is just unwilling. And that's the point when you have to decide, like, I cannot make people into something that they are not. You know what? I remember talking to you about a particular situation. And I said, Cameo, you know what it is about you? You expect better from them. You expect better from them. You want them to be better. You see their potential. Like, you are holding them to a higher standard that they just don't have. They just don't have it. And so being honest with yourself about the limitations or capacity of others is paramount.
It is.
Because from there, you can decide if and how you want to show up in that relationship. It's just like, okay, does this person have the capacity to be honest with themselves and to be honest with me, to handle me appropriately and to not mishandle me, or like, what is this person's capacity? What has been their history? That they are not responsible for your idea of them, how you imagine them to be in your mind. They are responsible for who they are. And when they don't live up to who it is that you want them to be, then you become frustrated and disappointed, and you keep trying to elevate them. And we have to respect their autonomy to not evolve or grow or elevate if they don't want to, or to do it in their time. A lot of people don't think that there's anything wrong with their behavior. And while that's baffling to a lot of us, right? It's just like, you are in consistent conflict with everybody. So say, like, do you have any conversations with yourself? Do you have any conversations with your therapist? Do you have a therapist? Oh, okay. You need therapy? All right. Everybody tells you that you need therapy because clearly nobody's getting through to you. You make irrational decisions all the time, like, and you expect for people to just go along with what you're saying. And then you find, a group of yes people who are unwilling to challenge your bad behavior. And you think as long as you got your yes committee, you can continue on with everybody else just being toxic. And it's like, not in 2021, not amid a global pandemic, not after we have sat in the house for a whole year and we have had to focus on our mental health, and you ain't focused on nothing. I can't.
I love how you also, like, even in this space, you're saying, like, it is not, if you continue to engage with people who show up like this, then that's on you. Right. And so again, even in this conversation, we are not saying it's all the other person's fault. It takes 2 people to show up in a relationship and for conflict to continue, for conflict to ensue. And so at the point that you recognize that this person that you're engaging with refuses to accept responsibility for their behavior, they refuse to self-assess, or to engage with you in a healthy way, then therefore that person has to make a decision about how are you going to move forward. Because two things, and I just want to highlight this because two things you said, we also have to give people their space to grow at their rate. Maybe it's just not time for them to grow right at that point in time. Maybe it is, and maybe you're the catalyst that's trying to like, hey, tap them on their shoulder. But if they make the decision to not grow, if they make the decision to not push themselves or even consider what it is you're saying, there's nothing you can do about it. And you have to respect that. And then treat the relationship as such. Because if you do not, you're going to consistently be tired. Heart done did 50,000 flips. You done wasted 2 hours trying to explain something they simply don't want to accept. You're going to begin to waste your time in that relationship. So this is a challenge on both ends, for the person who's attempting to have a healthy dialogue with someone and the person who also refuses to accept the responsibility in this place. I'm really passionate about this topic for several reasons, because I know a part of the work that I do, Danny, and you've articulated well with me, like Cameo, a part of your calling, a part of who you are is you really call people higher and you speak to them from that space. And so I had to check myself to say, hey, Cam, you can call people all day, but if they don't pick up the phone, if they don't want to listen, move on. And also because
that really is it. That's the whole gambit right there. What are you going to do now that you have the information? Are you going to respect their decision to stay stuck, to not grow, to not be accountable? Or are you going to continue to be in conflict with them because you are calling them higher and they ain't ready? What you gonna do?
Yeah. And also not that makes it that person, and we're not saying this, but just to be clear, that doesn't necessarily make that person a bad person. It's just not their time to grow in that area. Maybe they're focused on a different area. Maybe God is trying to show them something different that's not for this time. So just to make that clear. That's
good. I just wanted to say that it is important that we stop assigning good and bad to that.
Mm-hmm.
People are on a journey through this life, and we all reach our peaks and valleys at the design time that God allows for us to reach our peaks and valleys. And just because something is right for you at this time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be right for everyone in your life. And you have to move around accordingly and do so guilt-free and without being bitter toward the other person, because people really are doing the best that they can with the capacity that they have. And if you don't understand their capacity, that's not their fault, really. Like when you observe somebody and engage with them and they keep showing up how they are, you're able to assess where their capacity is, but you want them to do better than what they can do. Like, I mean, you have to let them do it at their own pace. That's a matter of respecting them and respecting yourself.
Yeah. And again, also glad that you highlighted that and that this conversation is layered. And again, not pointing the finger, but just how can we navigate our relationships better when there is tension and there seems to be no solution. And I think that's also a aspect of loving someone, because I think it's different. This conversation or this relationship looks different when you're talking about maybe a friend or a coworker than when you're talking about a marriage, right? Because it's a different story if you're trying to call your spouse higher and they're just not having it, and you are still tasked with loving them, respecting them, allowing them to exist, allowing them to grow at whatever pace they're going to grow with. Because on the flip side, if I'm with my partner, with my husband, with my man, and he sees an area that I need to grow in, and maybe he just like tap me on the shoulder or just say, hey, Cam, maybe try this, or remember when you had this conflict, or remember when you had this, just trying to show me, but I still refuse to see it. I don't stop loving me. What then in my mind, what then is love if you can't love me through my rough patches, right? If you can't love me as I'm growing, what then is that? But then this kind of points back to other spaces. I'm like, I don't, whether you think love is conditional, I do think love is conditional. I think you can also love without conditions, if that makes sense. Is it love? Yeah, love without condition, love without conditions. But I think this also goes back to the foundation of that said relationship, right? You know, what is our foundation? What do we believe collectively? What are our values? What are we creating together? Do we have congruent lifestyles? That's something you mentioned a lot. And I think as you're working through that conflict, those things will bubble up and be apparent. But also, he or she just may not change. And it's just something that we have to accept, and you still gotta love them.
I think the thing here that I want people to understand is you have to choose whether you want to continue to remain in conflict or not. You know, of course, it is much more challenging and difficult in a romantic relationship where you are married and committed to building a life with this person. You still have to decide, like, okay, if this is this person's capacity, how do I adjust to make this, you know, something that works for me? And if it's something that doesn't work for you, well, then there's a different conversation that needs to be had. But I think, you know, far too many times in non-romantic relationships, but in familial relationships, we end up in very toxic relationships with our relatives, with our cousins, our aunties, our caregivers. Like, we end up in toxic relationships with our caregivers because relatives often think that it's okay to just say and do anything to somebody because they're your relative, and you know, don't think that there's going to be any type of repercussion or, you know, whatever, that's family, so, you know, yada yada. No, that's really, you know, the stuff that I'm talking about. I would hope, it would be my hope that people aren't experiencing this level of conflict in their marriages. And if you are, you need to get help. You know, if you are having a clash like that, where you are in constant conflict with your partner, you know, you definitely need to get some help. You know, with regard to statistics of divorce, like, you know, people are just like, oh, you know, divorce rates are skyrocketing and through the roof. And I'm like, how much work did we do up front to make sure that we had lifestyle congruence and compatibility before we jumped into a marriage or a relationship? People think that because they are physically attracted to each other, that equates to relationship viability, and it just does not. And so, you know, if you have to put all of that into finding a life partner and building a relationship with someone, you need to also be looking at your interpersonal relationships. And a lot of us show up in our romantic relationships how we were groomed in our interpersonal and familial relationships. So earlier, when I was talking about like that lack of emotion regulation that you experienced from your parents, who might have cussed you out, who might have hit you, who might have been verbally or physically aggressive toward you in order to get you to do what they wanted, you know. It taught you how to people please, but it also taught you that aggression gets people to do what you want them to do. And so you have adult people who cannot have a healthy discussion without becoming loud, without, you know, and that is an intimidation tactic. It's like, you know, I'm gonna out talk you, I'm gonna out yell you, I'm gonna do all of this stuff. And it's like, oh, this stuff is unhealthy, and we have to decide that it's going to stop. And when you are the person who is trailblazing that, oh God, it's so hard. It is not easy at all, but it's necessary if you don't want the cycle to continue with your offspring.
Yeah. I was about to sing, it's so hard to say goodbye. I'm gonna stop there because I have like five different versions and lyrics going on. So I'm gonna stop there since you made that reference earlier. I'm gonna stop there. So, and another reason, Danny, that this hits home for me, because on the flip side of it, before I came to this realization that this is what was happening, that there was conflict and parties were not taking responsibility for their actions, I was the person who took responsibility for people's actions, right? When I self-assessed and said, yep, I was wrong here, I was wrong here, and I was wrong here, which were all true, but the other party didn't do it. And it very much left me taxed, hurt, and not healed. Because when there is responsibility, when there is accountability for folks' actions, then I think apologies come, changed behavior comes. You cannot begin to change your behavior if you don't accept it. If you do realize that there's conflict between you and someone that you want to be in relationship with, you can't change your behavior until you acknowledge it, and also acknowledging the hurt that you caused the person. But what it was for me is I was just like, okay, cool, yep, I did this wrong, and in a sense, let the person just kind of get off scot-free. And
you were carrying the weight of other people's stuff, and you cannot carry the weight of other people's healing, other people's mess, other people's whatever. Like
yeah,
you were taking all of that on and carrying it yourself, and that stuff will cause you to be anxious, depressed, stressed out, frustrated, on edge. It'll cause you to be all of those things, and it's not yours to carry, but you're trying to be the bigger person in the situation by carrying it, and that is abusive to yourself.
it is, and I think that's the word here, trying to be the bigger person. And we think it's noble. We think it's something to beat your chest for, but it's not, because you are dishonoring yourself in this space. It's not helpful to anyone, and you also do a disservice to the other person by not holding them accountable. And in a sense, like, no, I'm not gonna hold your stuff. Take it back. This is for you to hold. This is for you to assess. This is for you to chew on and marinate on, to see if there is some place where you can be better at. Because also what I think it does, and this is, I think, a different slice of the same pie, it in so many words, it makes me or the other party responsible for their healing. And I can't do that. That's not my job. That, like, I literally,
No,
I can't do it. And I don't know if we really understand what that looks like when we're in conversation and you think I'm responsible for your healing. So here's an example. We have a conflict. I say something that triggers you, right? I say, or I do something. Let's take it. I have on a blue and orange polka dot shirt. And suppose, Danny, you are triggered by blue and orange polka dot shirts. And you tell me, Cameo, I don't like the fact that you wore that blue and orange polka dot shirt. And I'm like, you know what? So some people would say, in that instance, a good friend then wouldn't wear blue and orange polka dot shirts around you, around Danny, right? And I think I would definitely take that into consideration because she is triggered by this. But if I just so happen to have on a blue and orange polka dot shirt for whatever reason, because I liked it, right? And that's something I really wanted to wear, I enjoyed it, and I knew Danny was going to be there. It is not my responsibility to change my wardrobe and to adjust my life so you can feel better. It is your job to figure out, why am I triggered by blue and orange polka dot shirts? Or how can I better manage my emotions when I see a blue and orange polka dot shirt? Because what we do, and what has happened to me multiple times, is, Cameo, I don't think you should be wearing blue and orange polka dot shirts around me. And I'm just like, oh yeah, no big deal. You my homegirl. I got you. But then what happens? I'm dishonoring myself. That's not what I want to do. That's not how I show up. And then before I know it, my entire closet is catered to making you feel safe, is catered to your triggers. And if you do that with all your friends, because I think that was definitely a part of my personality. If I do that with all my friends, if I do that with all my people, who then am I?
That means your closet is controlled by my trauma-induced narcissism. Let's just call it what it is. You try to control everybody else and everything around you, and everything needs to revolve around my trauma triggers, like not triggering me. And it's unfair, and it's not everyone else's responsibility to carry the weight of that, within reason, right? Within reason. That's something that's pretty reasonable. I need to go and resolve. Like, it is normal for you to be able to wear anything that you want to wear and me not be triggered by it. That's the difference between, I'll give another example. That's the difference between, like, something that's just a part of everyday life that people are going to do that is normal and healthy, and in and of itself is not dangerous or anything like that. I just happen to be triggered by it. Then I need to go do my own work, foster some healing in whatever ways I need to do that, in therapy, read some books, some podcast, whatever I need to do, instead of projecting that onto you. On the flip side, the one that I like to use is how we have normalized sexual violence in our culture. And so you have, people who will be sexually aggressive towards you based on whatever, and then will trip on you because you are triggered, or because you call them out and say, hey, I don't like that. I had a guy on the first date pull my hair twice and grope me, and I was triggered. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel comfortable. He had, first of all, that was just way too much too soon. Like, we aren't even, like, I don't even know your middle name. What's happening here? Like, this is too much. Like, what do you think? Like,
yeah.
The fact that you were this sexually aggressive and then just that aggressive, like, it's one thing for a guy to be touchy-feely in a way that's gentle, or they, or they kiss you and it's sensual and it's no, it was rough. Like, what would make you pull my hair? Like, and
on the first, but I was gonna say on the first date, but period. But it's period.
Without asking me or knowing me, we haven't even had, enough non-sexually intimate exchanges for you to even try to do something that was sexually intimate, but also to escalate that to what I consider to be sexual violence. Some people like to have their hair pulled. They like to be choked or get smacked and stuff like that. That's normalized sexual violence. You can call it what you want. But for me, I don't like anything that is aggressive. I don't want you to aggress toward me. You didn't even know me well enough to even know that. Like, you just thought it was okay to be aggressive with someone. That's not something that I was being unreasonable about. That's not something that should be normalized, even though a lot of it is normalized. People think that because they seen 50 Shades of Grey, and you're into this, what is it, BDSM or whatever, all of this, sexually violent stuff that gets normalized. Someone says something really funny. They posted a picture of a trailer in the middle of the woods and said, if the guy from 50 Shades of Grey lived in this trailer, this would be an episode of Criminal Minds instead of a movie called 50 Shades of Grey. You know what I mean? If he was doing this same stuff, and if he was broke and living in this trailer, it would be looked at as different. Again, mass media and popular culture may normalize some stuff, but if you trigger somebody, you need to be held accountable for your behavior, and you need to be able to respect their boundaries, not blame, shame, and attack them like this young man did when I addressed him about it. He became defensive, and he groped me again.
Oh my gosh.
And I never talked to him again after that.
And instead of assessing to say, I could be wrong. Like, let's start there. Like, when you're in conflict, because I think that's a good place to start. Like, you could be wrong in this situation, because I think there's also an arrogance there at what the person is presenting to you, that they're wrong automatically. That's something that I have seen consistently, that there is no consideration that you could be wrong, that you are the person that is at fault here, but it's always pointing at the other person. So even in that space,
but like you said though, like you said, it's not my responsibility to carry the weight of your healing, or to carry, the weight of you being responsible for your behavior. He's just like, he literally insulted me and said, well, aren't you a mental health therapist? Why can't you turn none of that off? Like, why don't, like, you need to get over that. Like, if somebody did something to you, if you were abused or assaulted or whatever, like, you need to get over that. You a mental health therapist. How are you a mental health therapist? And then you got all this, like, he literally attacked me. And then attempted to grope me again, y'all. It was like something out of a movie. But like you said, I was trying to be the bigger person. And I was like, maybe we just had a breakdown in communication. Yeah. So how about I try to communicate with him and let him know, like, hey, I'm not okay with this. Instead of just completely throwing him away and treating him like he was disposable, I made an attempt to say, maybe we're having a breakdown in communication, and maybe I just need to share some things with him. And me sharing with him resulted in him insulting me further and attempting to grope me again. Like, that's when you have to say, okay,
yeah,
I now have to dissolve the situation, limit your access. I now have to make a decision to respect that you want to be in that space and be whatever it is that you are. I don't even have to label you. I don't have to call you bad or toxic, I don't have to label you. I can just say, you know what? You don't work for me.
Yeah, because I think the consistent theme that I'm seeing there, when we refuse to accept responsibility for our behavior, is that behavior has been acceptable in so many spaces in our lives, and no one has ever challenged it. No one has ever challenged it. And so when someone does come along to challenge it, you feel attacked. But even shifting, like, just because someone is addressing how your behavior is not necessarily an attack. It could be an opportunity for you to grow, an opportunity for you to see a different perspective, or that there is a different way, or that, hey, you may encounter some women that enjoy their hair being pulled, right? But baby, this one doesn't, right? Or no, baby, you got to wait till we 6 months in until I tell you I like or I have to feel safe around you before we even begin to have that conversation. Because do you know when I pull back? Do you know what that means? Like, are you paying attention to but I think overall, that is what is at play, but that is a part of growth, that as we move along in life, everything isn't going to confirm our experiences. It's not going to confirm. It's not going to affirm. Growth pushes you out of your boxes. It pushes you out of what you know. And if we are consistently pushing back on things that challenge us, that challenge how we think, challenge how we move in the world, we're not going to grow. We're not going to grow. We're going to stay who we are. We're going to be the same person we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we're going to wonder why all of our relationships have either fallen apart or you haven't evolved. You got to grow. So Danny, I thank you so much for being a part of the Good Girl podcast. Woo, 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 woo.
Thank you so much for having me. It is always, always a pleasure to come in and say what up, though, to my good girl fam. Always.
And so if you are listening again, do not forget to subscribe to the Good Girl podcast. We can be found on all platforms. Also, find us on social media. We're going to do some fun things while we are on break. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to the Good Girl podcast. And I hope you continue to believe in the good.